you at least let him sit down? Yeah. You can kind of probe him along.
If everyone could take their seats as soon as possible, we'd really appreciate it. We'd like to hear as much from Judge Aloi as possible. Did you like that?
That was awesome. That was
I'll tell you what I'll do. Before I introduce our distinguished guest speaker, I want to again just do some other thanks. And a huge thanks to this law review crew who has put together an amazing, the largest symposium we've ever had at West Virginia University College of Law, and done a terrific job. And Rebecca Trump and Lexi and Alex and Zach, and you guys have just done an amazing job. It may sound patronizing for me to say I'm proud of you, but I am, so I'm gonna say it. And it's been an absolute pleasure to work with professional adults on this project who have been incredibly proficient. So I thank you very much, and if we could give them one more round of applause. The state should be proud of you. Moving on. It's an absolute pleasure to have the opportunity to introduce our distinguished lunch speaker, the Honorable Michael John Aloi. Judge Aloi, who is a distinguished graduate of the West Virginia University College of Law, currently serves as the United States Magistrate on the United States District Court for the Northern District of West Virginia. Prior to his appointment to that court, he served as a circuit judge in Marion County. While he was doing that, he established Marion County's first drug court and was one of 2 West Virginia judges to attend the Justice Reinvestment Act National Conference. Prior to taking the bench, Judge Aloi distinguished himself via, among other things, his expansive public service to his home state and his prolific and successful mediation practice. Judge Aloi served as president of the West Virginia State Bar and the Association for Conflict Resolution. He's mediated over 2,500 cases and is the only lawyer in West Virginia selected as an American College of Civil Trial Mediators Fellow. As a United States Magistrate Judge, Judge Aloi has continued to spearhead innovative initiatives designed to increase access to justice throughout the Northern District. He's established both a successful federal drug court program and a petty crimes diversion program for veterans. The judge also continues to serve as alma mater as an adjunct professor here at the College of Law. Out of all those amazing accomplishments, though, the most important thing to know about Judge Aloi is that he's a wonderful and inspiring mentor, and in my humble opinion, a West Virginia hero. It's been a true honor and privilege for me and my students to have the opportunity to work with him, and more, watch him work. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm West Virginia welcome to the Honorable Michael John Aloi.
Thank you so much. Well, it is such an honor for me to be here. You know, in my original bio, I always start out with saying it's Michael John Aloi. I'm the grandson of Italian immigrants and grew up in a small coal mining town of Farmington, West Virginia. So being the grandson of Italian immigrants and sitting around the table, we can talk and eat at the same time. So you all just, and eating and listening is no big deal at all. So I promise it will not hurt your digestion. But what I wanted to talk about first of all is I am a child of Appalachia. And I'm so proud of that. Let me say, so I know this is a black lung table right here. 50 years ago, 1968, I was 10 years old on the streets of Farmington, West Virginia. And it was the event of the Farmington mine disaster. It's still hard for me to think about and talk about. As those know, that disaster was the impetus for the 1969 Federal Mine Health and Safety Law, not only with safety in the mines, but also the Black Lung Act. And here we are 50 years later, and people suffering more than ever with it. So there I am, just a small boy on the streets of Farmington, and I'll tell you what I think is in particular an Appalachian story. You know, in Farmington, we would grow up, Farmington's 30 miles from here. Town of 600 people. And we would get up in the morning on a Saturday, and all my grandmother would say, who I called was Mama Kay, and she said, now, Michael, you just be home before dark. And that's how we lived. And so one of my little friends, Bobby Freeman, and he had two little Freeman brothers, his father died in a mine disaster. And during that time period, there were all sorts of events going on in Farmington. I mean, I remember during Christmas, they would send extra gifts. This was a summer picnic. So Bobby says, come with us, Michael. Well, I didn't know what it was. I'm with Bobby. We go to things together, and all of a sudden, it's a picnic for victims of the mine disaster. And so there I am, and we're just playing, running, doing all of these things, and all of a sudden, someone comes up to me, and they say, and I'm 10 years old, and they say, what are you doing here? You don't belong here. I'm afraid. I mean, I think I'm in trouble. And then I feel hands come upon my neck behind me. And so it just seems like it's getting worse. But then a voice said, don't worry, he's with us. I don't know who the man was. Do you ever think for a moment how purely Appalachian that is? And how we should never miss the opportunity when someone who is suffering or struggling to put our hands around their shoulder and say, he's with us. The whole core of all evil in this world is when we say they're not with us. Just think about it. And so growing up in this little coal mining town, I really was presented with my first lessons of social justice. There was a man named Delbert who always stood on the corner in Farmington and waved at everybody. Well, this is about that same time period, and I say, Uncle Johnny, I'm a young boy, and I know that adults go to work. I know that. And they shouldn't be on the corner waving at people. But Delbert was there waving every day, and we would always say, wave at Delbert, and we would, and it was in a very kind way. And if you knew the story of Delbert, Delbert had a lot of his struggles. He was an alcoholic. He was a poor man. He had mental illness. And my uncle could have said a lot of things. And it was my Uncle Johnny. And I said, Uncle Johnny, what does Delbert do? And he said, Michael, Delbert is someone that God put on earth for us to take care of. So that's the world that I come from. Those are the messages that I heard. He could have said a lot of things. He could have said he was a bum. He could have said he was a drunk. He could have said he was a dredge on society, but he didn't. He said, Michael, that's someone God put on earth for us to take care of. And so it was a beginning of my definition of social justice. I grew up with nothing but love in my home. My grandmother, this is the home I grew up in. My grandmother would take in alcoholics and put them in her basement. She said I had 3 rules, right? You don't drink while you're here. You got to work. And I swear our basement was painted 6 times a year. And the other thing she said was you can't cuss. I thought, wow, it was the beginning of a pretty good rehabilitation program. But I didn't know this. I didn't know why we had a cot in the basement, but I knew that that's what we did. I knew that his name was Polly, honest to God. But Polly, I knew was there, and I knew he stayed clean, and he would not drink, and he would paint our basement. And so that's what Mama Kay told us to do. And so I think we can't forget who we are. There's something about the hills. Look at Chuck DeSalvo. Chuck, you came here. How long were you going to stay in West Virginia? 5 minutes? What, 2? He's putting up 2 or 3 years, right? But then the sirens of the hills spoke to you, and you realized they would never let you go. So we should be proud of who we are and what the hills call us to do and how it causes us to be people that are nowhere else. And I did hear the keynote yesterday talked about the Ozarks. And the Ozarks are okay, but they aren't the Appalachians. And we got to love our hills. And they are the West Virginia hills. And they talk about it in the song. Raise your hands. How many know who Hazel Dickens is? Yeah, if you haven't heard of Hazel Dickens, she sang the song at the funeral in Matewan, 30-year-old movie now. Has a strong nasal Appalachian voice, and you talk about authentic. It'll make your knees weak when she sings. And the song is West Virginia, my home. West Virginia, my home, where I belong. And what did John Denver say? Country roads take me home to the place I belong. And so if there's a theme about what I'm talking about now, is that we all belong to each other. And there becomes a responsibility with that, and that is a uniquely Appalachian trait, something to be proud of. Because you go to, right, we wave at people that we don't know. You're supposed to do that. It's polite. We let people out on the corner when they need to get out, right? That's what, if they're from New York, they look at you like, I think they're just waiting to slam into me. No. We do it because we're kind, because that's what we do, because we know how to take care of each other. We don't drive by people who have a flat tire. I remember once in the State Bar, our bus pulled over the hill because it was too snowy. This was in midnight in a rural area in Upshur County, and within 10 minutes there were 5 guys in trucks with chains and salt and boards and everything else just to get us out, because that's what we do. And so let me say this, if there's something else I want to leave you with, we do not turn our head to those who are suffering the most. And what I will focus on in particular is a criminal justice system. And I think in many ways that we are not living up to our obligation of belonging, our sense of community, our sense of caring, and we are turning our heads to those people who need it most. And I've got to stare right at my classmate, class of 1983, Judge Keller, who's also a movie star, one of the heroines out of Huntington, West Virginia. There is no one I am prouder of than you. And you talk about someone who is good, who is decent, who cares, who loves those people who come before us. This is, Dean, this is who the law school should be honoring. And I mean that. She's beautiful. God bless you. So I couldn't help but notice, Valina, you were responsible for this, criminal justice in an epidemic. And I thought, wow, what a great title, because I truly do believe that our criminal justice system now is just structurally inadequate to respond to the problems that we have today. It's just inadequate. We built a criminal justice system that was meant to keep away people who would harm us, people who would kill us, rob from us, rape from us, do us serious injury, and then separate them from us. And by the way, you know that the opposite of community is separate. You're them. You don't need to be around us. We're going to separate you. There are no front porches in prisons. What do we do about this? When the primary things that I see every day, both in federal court and in state court, are struggles with addiction, mental health, veterans, people of color, and poverty. I would look all the time and say, you know what, I didn't think poverty was a crime, but we certainly treat it that way, because I've got to put you in jail because you don't have anywhere else to go. We should all have a collective moment of just sheer guilt over something like that. That is just wrong. And you see it. Judge Claudius, who started the first one in Mon County and has been a leader in the state drug courts. People ask, why is this the court's business? And my response is, what am I supposed to do when they are sitting right in front of me? What am I supposed to do? Say, no, it's not my job? Are you supposed to, as lawyers, saying, no, it's not my job? Or as academics, no, it's not my job? Yeah, it is our job. And so we have to find ways to respond to this crisis in a way that is meaningful and that is effective. Let me say something. It shouldn't have taken you long to get that I'm an idealist, that I care deeply about those people who are before us, and that I'm a lover of humanity. But I'm also a pragmatist. And so we need to respond to these issues in a practical way, an effective way. Guys, believe me, if a 10-year sentence would solve addiction, I'd be doing it every day, but it doesn't. 5 years, I'd do it. You can always tell people, we don't think about this, and I know there's a few legislators here, but let me ask you, if it takes 6 months to change behavior, then 9 months is too long and 3 months is too little. Now, I don't know how we find out what that right date is, but we should be talking about it and thinking about it rather than arbitrary amounts. Why? Guys, no one's writing about deterrence much, because when you see the people in front of us, if I could say one more year and you won't do this anymore, it's wired differently. It just is. And I'm not being critical of that. I understand how hard it must be to try to figure out the right way to respond to this. And I'll give you an example of that. As a circuit judge in Marion County, I'm with the people on Main Street who knew me as Michael, as a little boy growing up on the streets of Farmington. And I ran into one of them, and she looked at me in front of the courthouse and said, "Michael, we can't keep locking up all our young people." And I said, I understand, and it worries me. But honest to goodness, 5 minutes later, I had one of the grandmas come up and said, "Michael, what have you done to keep me safe today?" Those are the two little voices in my head that I have every time I sit down on the bench. So when I talk about structurally inadequate, let me talk about two things that I think would be helpful. I don't have any illusion that the sentencing guidelines are going to get changed, that Congress is going to change the time periods that they do things, and I don't think the state will. It just doesn't happen. There's no political will to do it, because there's not a whole lot of political will for the vulnerable. It's just true. But I think as members of the community, as people who care, there should be some. And you know, we're lawyers, we're the law, we're powerful. We should respond to this in a way that responds to both sides. And so first of all, I think it's up front what we do, which is diversion programs, drug courts, treatment courts, mental health courts. There are veterans courts. You know, we incarcerate veterans at a disproportionate rate. These are young people at 18 and 19 who, without thinking a whole lot, go off to save us and to stand in harm's way, and then in response, we incarcerate them at a disproportionate rate. The greatest provider of mental health services in the country is our correctional system. What is wrong with that picture? You see it. Judge Kalodja sees it. What it means to have some hope and for someone to care about you in a moment when everyone else has given up and says you're not worth it. That's a sin. You can never say you're not worth it. Let alone that we have some moral obligation to respond to it in a meaningful way. If you take away hope from people, then you've created the most desperate person in society when you have no hope. And I'll talk about that a little later. But the diversion programs, the drug courts, I have 9 people in mind right now. Pat probably has 50. How many do you have? 60. Yeah. So, with a waiting list. You know what, but I don't know if it's happened to you. Every time when I have someone before me and I say, you know, can we get them into a treatment bed now? And we're saying, sorry, Judge, there's not a bed. No one's ever told me, sorry, Judge, there's not a bed in jail. It's a matter of priorities. It's a matter of, if you want to know what's important to someone, see how they spend their time and their money. Again, and how much time are we spending, I think, on these programs that can respond to it in a very effective way. If you don't address the underlying issue in someone's addiction, you're not doing anything, and you all understand that. If you don't address the underlying issue, everything else you do is a waste of time. It is a waste of money. And if you don't change behavior, and if you can change it within a time period, then you've done something productive and effective, in addition to being good and kind and the right thing that makes us who we are in Appalachia. So, just a bit about the treatment program. Some of the things I love about it is we have what's called a treatment team, and this treatment team is diverse. We have prosecutors on it. We have public defenders. We have treatment people on it. We have the city police, chief of the city police on ours. We have law students who come down to be with us. We have probation. We have counselors. And so we do things in a very collaborative way, because the second thing I want to leave with you, we can't respond to this by ourselves as the law. It's a multidisciplinary problem. It really is. It takes medical professionals, it takes social workers, it takes lawyers, it takes neighbors. I was in a group with a behavioral medicine man, chair of the department, WVU, and he looked at me and he said, you know what, in this group, if we accepted the success rate that we have in responding to addiction, if we accepted that for infectious diseases, he said we'd be dead as a society. Do we want to blame those who are suffering with addiction for their inability to solve the problem? Do we tell people who have cancer, you know, you've been smoking for 30 years, I'm tired of it, go die? Do we tell diabetics, don't come back to the hospital, you're not eating right, you're not exercising, go die? No, we don't. And again, I think we forget who we are, that we do love our neighbors, that we take care of our neighbors, that, who do you think these people are that don't come back to our community? Why do we treat them as the other, someone else? They don't belong. Guys, the core of all evil is when we separate ourselves from each other. It's just true. And so how do we, in a judicial system, create a process that will bring out the best in all of us? You know, we kick some addict when they're down and say, why wasn't a 28-day program enough for you? You know, the West Virginia medical professionals have a program to treat their doctors who are suffering. You know how long you have to be in it? 5 years. 5 years. That's what they think's enough. And we want to kick someone down because they can't figure it out in 28 days. It's hard work. It takes time. Extremely proud of the bar for taking really significant efforts through the leadership of President Poore to create the West Virginia Judicial and Legal Assistance Program. Robert Alberry's here today, who is the head of that program. But I think as lawyers we have to think about it too, take care of our own. The other thing that I want to say in addition to treating it on the front end, and let me ask you what's so wrong about this, that if you do all the right things, you finally get a chance in life, and you get clean, and you get an education, you do all those right things. What's wrong with dismissing the case? Do we think everyone's going to start going out and committing crimes because their case may get dismissed because they finally get their life straight? I mean, I've thought about it a lot. I don't know whether that's all that wrong. So let me get to the other end of it. I think we get it up front, we get it on the end, which is second chance legislation. Most important thing I think that we can do. Do you guys understand that most people think you do your time and you're done? Felonies at one time were crimes that were defined by definition as crimes that were punishable by death. Serious stuff. And in fact, in England, the time period between when you were convicted and before you went to jail, when you were convicted and before you were executed, that time period was called civil death. And I can tell you right now, collateral consequences, which are the consequences as a result of being a felon, are far worse than civil death. We've created everything, want to call everything a felony. Once we do, then we tell you that this is an economic, social life sentence. Life sentence. Now, what I've said to the legislature is, look, you've got to decide what you think is an appropriate punishment. And if you think that committing this crime is something that you would live with, and the effects should be around until you die, you won't be able to have a job or anything else, good jobs that people need, then that's okay. That's your decision. And if what they have done is so bad, that's okay. I really don't think that that's the point. And so how do we just simply create a process for someone who's done everything right? Guys, and I've seen a lot of programs. You know, some are 20 years before you can even go back to let it extinguish. How many of you can hold your breath for 20 years? 10 years? Guys, it's too long. 5? No. Ohio has 3. The point is, if you do everything right, you go back. After 3 years, then you get forgiven. And if we're a society that values, quite frankly, Christian values, then amongst all others that value these things, forgiveness, it's a common denominator among others. But then there shouldn't be a place for forgiveness. for a chance when you do all the right things to say, okay, you can now go on with your life. Because if we don't do it, they'll give up. I don't, thank God, I look at them, Pat, and I think, I don't even know how you're doing it. Wouldn't you? I mean, if you had to go through what they did. Guys, you can't. You can't. We've created a system that if people got in a box and thought about it, we couldn't make it more impossible. What? Did you guys ever read the book called The New Jim Crow? Yeah, it's about telling us how Jim Crow, or in fact, the criminal justice system has made it harder on the people of color than the Jim Crow laws ever could have. Get a felony, you can't vote, you can't get any kind of professional job, you emaciate men, you separate them from their families, forget about the literal seeing people in shackles. It's not who we are. And we have to start pushing back against it. So here's how I, so second chance legislation, I think it's just critical. You can judge anyone, any society, any person as to what they think is important by looking at how they spend their time and how they spend their money. And I don't think we're spending our time or our money in the judicial system in a way that can be effective in responding to the needs of those who are, quite frankly, the most vulnerable. And these are our neighbors. These are members of our community. They are not the other. They are us. And if we think that way, then I just think it just simply represents the worst that we are as human beings. Now, Misha, she's still around. I think she had to go. But anyway, we were talking about there. Now, here's the good part. I do think that in rural Appalachia, in West Virginia, that rather than being viewed as ground zero for the opiate crisis, that we truly can be viewed as the people who responded to it in the most effective way. People coming to West Virginia to see, how do you respond to this? How do you do it right? They're making movies about that. The point is that we can do it. We're small. Okay, we can respond to this in a way that makes sense. We can do it quickly. We can be light on our feet. We have the university here. We have the law school here, all in one place. It represents, again, who we are as Appalachians. And so when they talk about West Virginia, they're going to talk about how they responded to the crisis. Let me say this, and I have to, because if I do have a little bit of an Appalachian chip on my shoulder, it's been centuries being put on there. You know what? We aren't creating any drugs in West Virginia. Every single drug that here, other than marijuana, is brought in. In the federal system, we talk about source states. West Virginia is not a source state, okay? Cocaine doesn't come from West Virginia. Heroin doesn't come from West Virginia. Crystal meth doesn't come from West Virginia. All the marijuana that's coming in now is coming from the states who grow it legally. And then you want to blame us, right? The poorest, most vulnerable people in society for things that you are just dumping in on us. No. And so if we ask for some outside help, we deserve it. We should have it. You've been just as much a part of this problem as we are. I sit in Elkins, West Virginia, and I have to look at people that I grew up with who look like my little neighbors, little boy I'm running around on the streets. And I look at their faces, and these rural Appalachian faces. And I realize in Elkins, West Virginia, they're coming over from Virginia with crystal meth from Mexico, where people go back and forth to Mexico with millions, and they find a vulnerable, helpless population, and boom, you have one, and they're done. Now, this is a big, complex problem, but don't blame us. I mean, pharmaceuticals figured out pretty quickly where they were going to go in West Virginia to dump off a lot of opiates, right? You find the poor, the vulnerable, people who are feeling a little bit hopeless. So we stop it, and we start responding to it in a compassionate, effective way. This is what neighbors do for each other. This is what, when you were little and you had something, the other one didn't, you shared it. And if you were strong, you took care of the weak. You didn't kick them when they were down. I talked about this sense of taking me home to where I belong, of Hazel Dickens. We all belong to each other. Mother Teresa had commented that if today we have no peace, it is because we have forgotten that we belong to each other. That man, that woman, that child is my brother or sister, and if everyone could see the image of God in their neighbor, do you think we would still need tanks and generals? So you ask me, why do I care? Why do I do this? Because it's in front of me. Just yesterday on video, I'm having a young lady buckled over because she's in detox. And Pat will know this feeling, and both judges and Judge Claudius, when I have someone in front of me and I think, as a judge, am I going to let you go home? And if I do so, have I then become your biggest enabler? And I've made it worse. Or if I don't let you go home, have I missed that window of hope that may never open again? And so I don't know what your answer is. Mine is only just to love the person in front of you, care deeply, and to do what we've always done, which is to care for each other, right? It's what we do. It's who we are. And I hope, if I've done anything that I've caused you to think about it, I can tell you I'm ashamed of myself. I didn't even think about it in private practice. I went 28 years and just didn't think about it until I got on the bench, and then it hits you full throttle, right, Russ, when you get on the bench. My God, yeah, so I'm ashamed of myself. But this is it. You know, WVU Law School, number 6, public interest. All because Chuck DeSalvo started at one time. The patron saint of public interest here at WVU. St. Chuck. There we go. It's a good one. It's a good one. Yeah, but number 6, right? That's what we should be, number 6. It should be in the headlines. I don't know why it's not on the front, Dean, of the Dominion Post. God, you know, they have WV on there, number 21. You know, we should be up there. But it's something we should be proud of because it defines who we are. You know, in New York and the metropolitan areas, they don't know their neighbors, right? Do they go over and take them a pie when someone's sick? No, we do. I remember as a little boy, my grandmother, their mother died, and we had all these kids around the table. And I said, Mama Kay, why are they here? She said, it's okay, Michael, the mother died. We're going to feed them. So, what we have now is this great challenge, really this great blessing, this great gift, that we can respond to this in a way that the rest of the world can look at and admire and say they've done it right. And not only have we structurally done it right, have we done it right as a system, we've done it with goodness, with kindness, with love, because we take care of each other. As much as you come in, as much evil as you drop on us, we're going to take care of each other. What an honor it is for me to be here today. Like I said, I grew up in Farmington, West Virginia, a town of 600, the grandson of Italian immigrants. I don't forget they were made fun of. My grandmother never spoke, my great-grandmother never spoke English. I remember my grandfather getting pulled over because he was a bootlegger. And the police officer looked at him, he said, let me see your hands. And they were big, thick, callous hands. He says, you're not a criminal. He said, you're a worker. And he let him go. So I grew up in a world, and how thankful I am, with nothing but goodness and kindness and love, something that the people before us have never known. How many of your women are sexually abused? I had one the other day. We're trying to discuss in drug court, and I said, you know what? Her mother was 14 years old when she was born. She was sexually abused. Her father's in prison. I said, if we don't take her in and stop this now, then when's it going to stop? So that's the great challenge, great opportunity we have. And you know what? We're blessed to have that opportunity. We're blessed to be surrounded by good people who work hard, who will make a difference. And I'm you know, people will say, boy, how good it is that you do the work you do. And all I can say, what did I do to deserve the goodness I have? And to be trusted to do the work I do. But as my grandmother would say, when you receive a gift, you're supposed to say thank you and then be worthy of it. Thank you all for having me. Have a great day.